Films who made that film for us, and for the residents and partners like from NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, for being part of the film and for lending their voice and their viewpoint to the film. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Gordon, who's going to talk more about the natural history of the river.
So hi, I'm Gordon Harris. I've been the Ipswich town historian for 10 or 12 years. I wanted to look into a comprehensive history of the Ipswich River because, repeatedly people bring up, well, the dam is historic. And everything's historic. I recently learned that my 70-year-old house is historic by state standards. So we have to kind of look at a bigger picture of what is historic. So I wrote a long article on my site, historicipswich.net. I hope you visit it. It's right there on the homepage now. A natural history of the Ipswich River and a history of the Mill Dam. So what I did for this about 5-10 minute presentation here is just take a little, so the images and just a few quick notes from it. I hope you'll go to the site to actually read the article. This quotation came from Captain Edward Johnson, Wonder Work in Province, which was a really interesting book that was written, and he wrote about, I believe he lived up in the Reading area, and he wrote about Ipswich. And so when he described the Ipswich River, he described how you're going up into what's now Bradley Palmer and Willowdale, and it was such a wild place. It was habitat of bears and wolves. It was a place where it was a dangerous place to go. And the river was a wild river full of fish, and they came out. They came down the river and they flowed out into the sea. And what he's saying here is, that the fish that we all eat today, the salmon or the haddock and the cod, this was their food stuff. This is why the Isles of Shoals was such an important place for those early settlers who came here. So the Ipswich River flows through quite a hilly terrain, as you probably know. 15,000 years ago, where we're sitting here today was covered by maybe up to half a mile of ice. As the Laurentide Glacier retreated, a number of things happened. First of all, the land was flooded because the ocean had more water, and then with the weight of the glacier lifted off the land, slowly the land lifted, and then the water receded again about 12,000 years ago. The glaciers left behind all these hills that were surrounded. You're on Topsail Road and you're driving on Route 1, you're going up and down. Those are glacial drumlins. And then when you look at the hills all around Ipswich, this is what the Ipswich River had to flow around as it came down. So we're looking back about 12,000 to 14,000 years ago, and that I believe that we can say that that's when the history of the Ipswich River, as we know it, began. So the river flows upstream all the way up to Wilmington. I believe it's 148 square miles of wetland. So all these various streams and ponds feed into the Ipswich River. At the same time, several of these towns upstream, they're in the watershed, and so they're using water. So it's a very comprehensive two-way cycle that's going on here. So in this map of the Ipswich River watershed, we can see the herring runs. So the Ipswich River. Let's see if this little pointer works here. I don't think it does. So up in the upper right corner, you're getting into Ipswich here. So you look at all the ponds and streams that are feeding into it. Not all, I want to mention the Mile River goes into Hamilton. You may not even think of it today as a river because a lot of the times the water is so low. But lately, with the water as high as it is, if you're driving on Route 1A, take a look at over at the Miles River when you cross the bridge. It's so wide right now. That was a much wider river. It was they talked historically about two rivers. That river goes upstream. It goes through Hamilton. Eventually got all the way up to Wynnum Lake, and the herring would swim all the way up there. where the Miles River comes in is pretty much right behind the Ipswich River Watershed Association. They're close to where the railroad bridge crosses over. But even going further upstream, all of these ponds that we're seeing here are part of the Ipswich River Watershed. Hood Pond, which you're all familiar with, even further up to 4 Mile Pond, all the way up to Middleton and North Reading. You have ponds that drain into the Ipswich River Watershed. One of them is the Great Wenham Swamp. So there's a couple places you can visit that. First of all, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Ipswich River Sanctuary, Mass Audubon's property. And that's one of my favorite places to go hiking. It has wonderful eskers and drumlins. These are all glacial formations. And it's surrounded, the higher land there is surrounded by this marsh. That is part of the Great Wenham Swamp. Another way to visit the Great Wenham Swamp is by bicycle. If you go to Topsfield and get on the Topsfield Rail Trail that goes to Danvers, you cross over the Great Wenham Swamp, and there's this wonderful trail walk. So that is another place that the herring and other anadromous fish, and that's fish that swim upstream to spawn, would go up by the millions, and in times before the present, and then it would spawn and they would come back downstream. So they need these. They don't need the larger bodies of water. They need the lower bodies with certain kinds of gravelly beds to do their spawning. That's a great place to go for a walk. It's about maybe not even a quarter mile, I think, 1/10 of a mile boardwalk that goes through the swamp. And the way to get to that is if you're on the Topsfield Rail Trail, you cross over Route 97, and then it's on the right-hand side between Route 97 and Danvers. So Wenham Lake was really a huge destination for the anadromous fish, especially the blueback herring and the alewife. That Wenham Lake is now a water supply for Salem and for Beverly. How many of you have ever seen the Grand Wenham Canal? I think there's another name from it. It's a canal that connects the Ipswich River to a pumping station and fills this during the months, I think it's December through spring. You see this? It's amazing. It's this beautiful canal. There's actually trails on either side of it. There are regulations about how much they can pump, but they do this pumping during this time of year when the water is so high that it's not going to affect the river, the total amount of river in our watershed and coming down the river. The thing about Wenham Lake, though, is that the water used to drain out and come down the Miles River. It's bare. That stream has been put into a culvert under Route 1A there, and it's been greatly altered. So it's not very likely that fish are going to swim up to Wenham Lake again. So this is the Miles River I was talking about, and that's about what you'll normally see with the Miles River these days. But in colonial times, it was large enough that it had a sawmill on it. The Appletons, you know where Appleton Farm is, and some of the Appletons operated a sawmill there. And right now, the river doesn't look like that at all. It's spread out through the wetland banks that you're seeing here in this picture. 2016, we had a drought. We've had two or three droughts in the last decade. This was a pretty big one. It just happened to coincide with a time when it was a planned drawdown of the river to determine. One of the things they wanted to determine was whether the foundation of one of the EBSCO buildings that's right on the edge of the riverbank, whether it was wood pilings or what. Subsequently, they've found by actually cutting into the floor of the EBSCO building there along the river that it is not on wood pilings and will not be affected by the drawdown of the river. Interesting thing happened here, though. So the water was taken down, I think somewhere between 2.5, 3 feet or whatever. Once it got down to basically where it's kind of the muck level is, right? And there's down over on this side is a gate that they could use to lower the water. As a matter of fact, you can see here someone's in this picture right at the controls of that gate. So when it was lowered, what was seen? You see the rock formations behind. if we're going to talk about, you know, this granite wall stone dam being historic, there's an even more historic dam behind it. This really appears to be an old crib dam, and that probably dates back to, you know, to the 1700s. It was quite a number of dams. The earliest ones were pretty primitive and partial because they didn't have the ability to utilize all of the water. The crib dam, basically, this is the way they would do it. They would build a stone frame, a wooden frame, and then fill it full of rocks. And eventually that wooden frame would rot and go away, and then the rocks would still be there. So if you look on the top of this, you see there's an old pipe. Apparently the Ipswich mills that were there ran a gas line across when they were using gas for some of their power probably after they were using the dam. So there was other pictures that we took that were taken during that drawdown. Now remember, first of all, we have a drought. It was a record drought. If you were over at the Riverwalk Bridge and you were looking downstream during low tide, because it is a tidal river, the tide comes right up to the dam. During low tide, there was basically no water in the river below the dam. And there was, of course, the water was up to the top. But the water levels were low upstream, and then when we dropped the river, the level of the water about 3 feet during this drawdown for the dam. This is what the river behind the Ipswich River Watershed, the early headquarters, looks like. It was, you can see that it was still navigable by kayak. The river bed is normally about here, and then the water at this level was down to this level. That was, I forget, it was about a week period, I guess. Neil, is that about right? Yeah. That the water was it took a few days to get it down, and then of course a few days for the river. Probably even more days for the river to fill itself back up, because I think at that time the water was flowing, you know, probably like a cubic foot a minute was during that drought. What's a normal flow? What's the flow of the Ipswich River today when it's so high?
Closer to 180 cubic feet per second.
180 cubic feet per second, so it does vary a lot. One of the interesting things about the herring is that they are accustomed to this. The rivers that they go upstream do have droughts, and of course not in the spring, but sometimes in the fall when the herring come back downstream, or late summer, early fall, they will actually sometimes delay their departure from the spawning grounds, waiting for the rains to come back in the early fall. So this has been a problem for a long time because in the 1800s, the textile industries came through all of New England. There were dams were put up on all the rivers. You know, they were ordered to build fish ladders, and some of the companies actually fought this because they said, well, if we don't see any alewife, do we really have to do this? But this particular law, 1770, Massachusetts State Law and Act, prevented destruction of alewives and other fish in the Ipswich River and encouraged the increase of the same. Why was it so important? Well, as we know, the Native Americans, they kind of relied on the alewife and other fish that would come up the river after the long winters when they were low on food. You know, that they needed these fish, and then the colonists did the same. It was one of the primary sources of income for some of the colonists. They would catch and ship thousands of barrels of dried fish, usually off to the West Indies. It was a very odd part of that triangular trade trade where in the West Indies where they were growing cane and they had all the slaves, basically didn't have anything. They'd taken away all of the natural habitat. Didn't even have food for all the slaves. So we would ship them fish and other foodstuffs in this triangular trade. So this law was passed in 1770, trying to turn around and prevent destruction of this alewife fishery. Because when the dam goes up, the height of this one, the alewife cannot jump over the dam. And it was the immediate death of an industry that they've been counting on and using for so many years. This is an example of how the Native Americans, actually right here and probably at the Ipswich Mills Dam, would catch fish. They would create these weirs. So this is an example of sort of a funnel. The fish would swim into the funnel, wouldn't be able, it's like a net, they wouldn't be able to get out. And most likely, you know, I don't know where this particular picture comes from, but this is very similar to the rocks that we see around the Ipswich River now, because in the early records of the town, they've talked about two falls. Now, if you're driving on County Street, and if you look over on the right-hand side there, it's really rocky. I mean, it's like class 5 rapids in water when the tide's going out. I was really amazed to see something like that when I moved here to Ipswich. But there was an upper falls as well, and it was more like a rolling falls, and that's where the Ipswich Mills Dam is now. So the other way they would catch these herring, they would be catching them in the spring, going upstream to spawn. But of course, like I mentioned, when they get to be about 4 inches or so in the late summer, or maybe as late as early fall, they would come back downstream. So they had another, the colonists, and even into the 19th century, mid-19th century, people had another way of catching these fish. It was called herringing, and they would use torchlight. You're probably familiar with Candlewood Road, and the reason Candlewood Road got its name is they would take little sticks of pine, and it has a lot of rosin in it, and that was kind of like their early candles that before these colonists were able to get wax from England, they would burn these pine sticks. And so you see these people are burning those pine sticks on the ends of their boat, and this would attract the herring. They would come up, and then they would catch them with the nets. So it was actually 2 different periods of herring fishing, and they would catch so many. There were so many that you see the numbers. I was just astounded. In the 1800s, the annual catch in Ipswich averaged 350 barrels. Billy Barton, a friend of mine, lives here in Ipswich, and his grandfather, William J. Barton, wrote about doing this as a boy, and he said that one year they caught so many, they basically fished the herring out of the river. They ended up having to dump them out, and it took a few years. The herring runs just were very weak after that because they were interrupting the cycle. They're overfishing, but they did come back, and this was 1800s, and so that was just before, I think it was his great grandfather, and it was just before the dam reached its current height. So this is 1832 map, and you see the building here. This is not the current Ipswich Mills. 1828, they built a stone building. It was a mill. They built it at great expense, and it went out of business. What they did before, this is when the first actual stone dam was built in the town. And what we're looking at here, you can just barely see where the dam is here. This house is called the Philemon Dean House. Sometimes it's referred to as the old lace factory, right there on South Main Street. There is a town right away, so when you were coming down South Main Street, actually originally, before they built a bridge where the choke bridge is now, there was a ford. If you're not familiar with that word, it's a place where you take a cart or a horse across the river. It was a flat place just below these rapids. And so when in 1828 they built the first stone dam, they built the dam right on top of that. They got permission from the town to close that ford, which was really not being used anymore because after all we have the choke bridge, and they built a dam on top of the ford. The way I look at the maps, the way I understand it, is that the natural falls was right behind that ford. And when the dam is removed, I think we will again see that ford exposed along with the older rocks. So we're going to have a natural waterfalls, partially from the ledge that's there and partially from the rocks that we use for the old Prig Dam. So that was 1828, and then that business went out of, several businesses came and went there until Amos Lawrence purchased the operation and built the huge complex, that part of which is the EBSCO buildings now. But as you can see, it was a much bigger complex. Many of those buildings are gone. This huge building right here, that's where the Riverwalk mural, the little park is there. This is actually the footbridge was on top, right over the dam. Part of the reason for that was because the dam wasn't as high originally as it is today. Instead of having the 6 foot wall all the way up, it must have been about 18 inches shorter, and they would use these flash boards. In other words, they're boards that they could drop in and raise or lower the dam depending upon the amount of water needed. And so originally the flash boards were 6 inches, and then they went to 12 inches. When they got to 18 inches, it basically, they must have been getting close to the level that we are today, and then eventually they did away with the flash boards, so you couldn't drop and lower the water, especially during the herring runs. When it went to the full height that it is today in 1862, the people upstream complained that their properties were being flooded. And so the town of Ipswich was, actually not the town of Ipswich, but the mill owners were forced to compensate people for taking of land. And so, of course, so now the people who own those properties today feel like the opposite is going to happen, and they're going to lose the river. They're going to get their land back, but I don't think they have to pay the town back for getting free land. So this is a cyanograph. It was taken by Arthur Wesley Dow. You see how close the footbridge at that time was, right to the dam. Arthur Wesley Dow was, probably took this around 1890, 1900. There's been a number of fish ladders that have been constructed, going way back to the probably 1700s, at least the early 1800s. They built the fish ladders, and then this one, excuse me, this one was pretty much a complete failure. The fish had to come in way over here. I mean, I can't think like a fish, but I'm guessing that the fish swim up the middle of the river and expect to be able to keep on going. And so they've already passed the entrance of the dam. They were up there, probably like my little puppy is too stupid to go back and find where the door is, So there was no, that just didn't work at all. So the idea with this one was, well, they're up there and they can take these turns. And it's an improvement of some sort, but the fish count, I'll let Neil and Carla, other people talk about that when they're answering your questions. It really is not a successful fish ladder. None of the fish ladders that have been on that site have really been able to save the herring run. So there's good news. We talked about, well, some people have asked me, what reason would we remove the dam when nobody's doing anything upstream? Well, the good news is that they are. And the first big obstacle as you go upstream, of course, you pass where the Miles River comes in, is the Foot Brothers Dam. And we all enjoy kayaking on the river up there. So they have a little fish ladder there. It's small. I don't know what the effectiveness level is, but there's been a lot of discussion now. It's a really interesting plan that Neil will be able to explain more about, to build a nature-like fishway with a separate stream, and that the fish will kind of detour around the dam. And then we get up to the Howlett Brook. Howlett Brook is in Topsfield. I'm not sure if this is part of the dam, the river is in Tasso, but this was built last year. And this is another example of a more natural fishway that the fish, hopefully the fish are gonna be able to use. Of course, they can't get there yet because our dam is blocking the way. So that's really hopeful. And then another really good piece of news, now we're getting all the way up to Middleton, and this is as far as the herring runs would be able to go presently because of this dam. It's called the Bostic-Finley Dam, and it's been a long process. But that dam, as I understand, is coming down next year, hopefully. This year.
Really?
All this good stuff that's happening upstream. And so the argument, well, is that why should we do anything as long as these other things exist? Now, we don't, I'm sure they might be asking the same question. Well, why should we do anything when those people in Ipswich won't do anything? And we have no excuses anymore. We're on the verge of recreating, and it'll take time, a lot of things to be done. The river as it flowed for, you know, 12 to 14,000 years before the dams went up. Another important part of the river system, if you want to have fish, if you want to have a healthy ecosystem, is what's on the side of the river. So if you get up into the Salem and Beverly area, you know, with, for example, Wenham Pond, there's a little bit of natural area, but there's a lot of pavement. You know, the highway goes right next to the pond. You don't have the forest system which supports the riverine system, the water coming down from the forest, and you all know how wet these forests are. Ipswich was full of streams. Matter of fact, all the area behind where Market Street is, and behind there, Depot Square, Brown Square, where, you know, the Tepper's Lumber Yard is, all the way up to Middle Street. That was all of wetland. There was a brook called Farley's Brook that had two branches that came down, flowed. They had to put a bridge over Market Street. Going back to the 1950s, we put that brook underground. And you wouldn't even know what's there. It goes right underneath Zoomies. There's the ceiling, and Zoomies is about in the basement is about 4 feet high because the Farley Brook runs underneath it, and if you go out into the parking lot, you can see where it comes in. But you know, they did discover that water is still there underground because of Washington Street, where that new project is going in at the corner of Washington Mineral, and they started digging there. They basically dug into an underground lake. That's where the water is. I don't know how they resolved that about that construction project. The idea here with this picture is that the forest feeds the river and is part of that riverine system that all the different kinds of fish need. And it wasn't just alewife. I mean, there was so many fish that swim, different kinds of fish that swam up the river. There were river trout. There was shad. There, I have a long list here. I don't see it right now, but a lot of these fish, the natural fish that live on the river, perch and freshwater fish, they also counted on the herring to doing the annual herring runs, you know, and they would eat the eggs, etc. So it is a circular system. It is a natural water system. The river is part of it. The water vapor, of course, evaporates, comes back and feeds it again. Another thing about the dam that has been discussed lately, because we've had some high water levels lately. Probably a lot of you remember this monster that happened, 2006. If you weren't here in town, the river overflowed its banks. This is down on South Main Street. It was Zoomies. It was about 3 feet of water, 2 or 3 feet of water behind Zoomies. It was actually going over Market Street. So one of the questions about is, what is our dam actually for? It hasn't served the purpose for over 100 years. It was originally for water, for water for the dam, but that period of time when they used water power using this current dam, because the current dam was built probably right around 1880 or 90. It might have even been enhanced a bit even after the beginning of the 20th century. It was maybe only 10 years later that electricity came along, and the Ipswich Mills were a big adopter of all the new technology that came along. They quickly went over to using probably some gas, but electric to run their motors. And so from the time that the dam reached its current height to the time they quit using it was a very, very brief amount of time. And yet, so that was part of that trade-off we were talking about, is the dam, is it good for our town? The question here with this picture is, what would it be like if we lowered the water and allowed that natural floodplain to exist? Like when we go back and look at the 2016 drawdown pictures. I'll admit I'm not a geologist. I don't know. I'm not an expert on the river. I expected it would give us a little bit of a buffer, maybe not a lot, but maybe you can help us with that too, Neil. That's been a question that's been asked, pro and con. There people say if you take the dam down, it's going to destroy the Choke Bridge. Well, the Choke Bridge was there for a long time before that particular dam came. There are other people who are saying if we don't take the dam down, then we're going to have more and more floods. So that's a really important part of this discussion that we're going to have in just a few moments here. So when the dam is gone and the herring begin to come back, we'll be able to stand on that Riverwalk Bridge, and during the spawning migration in the spring, this is what we're going to see. And in every town where they've taken down the dams, people are saying, I didn't know it was going to be so great. I didn't know we were going to see this. And it's a really big plus. It'll draw people to our town to see the annual herring run. This has happened in other towns in Massachusetts as well. So finally, just to wrap this up, we talked about saving the river, and we talked about saving the dam. We would free the river from basically a granite wall that's stuck across that location right there. You can see the natural falls just below it, some of the rocks from that. And when you look at it from above, it makes a lot of sense to me that dam just doesn't really belong there. It's not serving a purpose. What's beautiful is not the dam, it's the water that flows over the dam that's behind the river, and that will still be flowing when the dam is gone. So thank you very much for listening to my little presentation here, and I hope you'll go to my site, historicipswich.net, and make sure that the article gets with all the research and all the references is right there on the homepage. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much. It's so interesting. I love seeing the old maps and photos.
Yeah.
So we'll open it up for any questions. Does anybody have any questions? We have Gordon, we have Neil, we have Sarah here from the IRWA team. Anybody? Thank you, Gordon. Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. Whoa, hello.
We haven't seen light like that since last summer.
Yeah. Any questions about anything?
So why do people want to keep the dam? I see these signs popping up, say about dam. What's their argument?
Why do people want to keep? Neil, do you want to?
Sure,
Can you
I
join
can
us up
try.
here? The mic can pick you up better if you're up here.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for anyone either that has those signs and stuff, but part of this too is understanding where those people are coming from, and in my experience in having conversations with those people, they're passionate about the dam because it's what they grew up with. They've lived here for a long time. They have emotions attached to it. They grew up either recreating on it, swimming behind it, or their house is right behind it, and so they have strong emotional ties to it. And so I think as soon as, it's like anything in a small town, when there's a proposal to mix things up and change things, there people get defensive, and so I think it's a kind of a rightful reaction. But I think part of what's been tough and what we've constantly been trying to do is the reasons why we want to take it down. So it's hard to separate the emotional part of it sometimes, but we're just as emotional on the other side, where we feel like this is the right thing to do for the river and for the community too. So it's really just trying to, and some people, we're never going to change their mind, and I think that's fine too. So, but it's just about making sure that people know why we want to do it and why.
But there's no scientific argument to keep it.
No, as far as I know, no. I've never heard of a good ecological or scientific reason to keep a dam. There's no flood control, so from that point of view too, there's nothing, no public service that the dam provides. There's no, some of these discussions are harder, like out west when these dams provide power or they provide flood control. There's a much stronger argument to keep them in place, whereas there's none of that here.
With the dam gone, would there be any change in the ability of the river to withstand changes of flow?
Yeah, definitely. And so the type of dam that the Ipswich Mills is, it has no impact on flows downstream. So the amount of water that's flowing over the dam would be the same once the dam is out as well. But for upstream, it has huge impacts. And so, like Gordon was mentioning, this aerial picture does a really good job of showing it, is that taking the dam out restores the natural upstream floodplains. And so floodplains allow, that's what their function is during a flood, they take in water and hold it. That's their natural function, and then they slowly release it back into the river where it's supposed to go. Whereas now you have this situation where the bathtub's essentially full. So during any flood or any rainstorm event, that extra water has nowhere to go. So people's yards get flooded, that happens. And so without the dam, you restore the natural floodplains and you restore the river's ability to hold a little bit more water. So floods are still gonna happen. They're, like that 2006 flood, that's the flood of record. That's one of the biggest it is the biggest flood that we've ever experienced on the Ipswich River. If something like that happens, that's gonna inundate almost everywhere anyways. But during smaller floods, restoring the natural floodplains is going to be a huge benefit to allowing the river to more naturally deal with its flood flows.
If the selectmen decide to remove the dam, how long is the time frame for the removal? And I know there's going to be extra costs, there always are. Are we going to be able to pay for it without raising taxes?
It's a great question, yeah, and we've already kind of planning for that. So the vote, we're at this point now where the selectmen wanted to kick it to the public for a vote, because it's really kind of a crucial juncture of, we need to decide if we're going to go forward and start permitting for this project. Permitting is a long process, especially for dam removals. Like the Bostic Dam that Gordon showed, that got stuck in permitting for a long time. Over 5 years, and so sometimes these projects can languish a little bit depending on how complex they are or what's going on, and that's especially so for dam removal projects. And so when we're making a budget and applying for a grant, we take those things into account, and so we put in lots of contingency and things like that. And so when we're planning to get money for the hopefully the eventual removal of the dam, we would have enough funds to cover what we expect, but also some things that we don't expect too. Just because we've seen it so many times, so now we kind of know what to plan for, especially during the permitting phase. So, but there's zero chance that it would ever be reflected on the taxpayers. These projects now, I've worked on a couple myself, and there's plenty more that when they run into up against the ends of the budget, there's plenty of money available for these types of projects. Private funders, the state, the feds. If you've gotten that far in your project, they want to make sure that it happens, and so very often there's money available to make sure that they happen without the expense of public dollars.
How long will the actual removal?
Oh, right, okay, yeah, and that too. So once you get all the way through permitting, the actual removal, usually plan on a month or two, and from start to finish, so from the moment they get in, from the moment they get out, probably 2 months max. Yeah.
How long is the permitting?
Permitting at minimum would be a year. Oftentimes goes a little bit more than that, but the state is slowly getting more efficient at doing this. It takes a long time on their end. There is a lot of red tape, but there's so much momentum and evidence that points towards wanting to get these projects done quicker, that it's starting to go a little smoother at their end. The problems that, the hiccups that come up during the permitting process are getting easier to deal with. So year minimum, but that's, you never know.
That LD legislative document that showed in the presentation, I believe it, I was trying to read it, you mentioned the dams were to the detriment of the cod fishery. And I was amazed at that. I don't know, when was that legislative document?
There was several acts of the state legislature, and that one I think was 1770. And if I understand correctly, the relationship with the cod is that the blueback and alewife are feed fish for ocean fish. That they go back downstream, and so when you go to the grocery and you buy cod or haddock, you're buying fish that ate the fish that swim up our rivers. So it's part of our food supply in an indirect way.
Because that's earlier than what I was aware of.
Yeah.
In the Revolutionary War, I believe it was Massachusetts, it was actually at Portland, Maine, in Presumpscot. They were trying to get legislative documents. Now, Maine was part of Mass.
That's right.
So it would have been a Mass document because the British raiders were keeping them from the ocean fishes, the local people, the near shore fishery.
Right.
They couldn't go out there,
That's right.
and they relied on the fish coming into Presumpscot and Sebago Lake. And that got cut off because of the dam. But the fact that he's recognizing that cod fishery was destroyed in not just this river, out in the near shore, but other rivers. And these people are against the dam. I mean, I don't think they have a clue. I mean, against the dam removal, have a clue that how it destroyed this incredible fishery that was like no other in the world, the whole Gulf of Maine. And so it's.
And I was reading about the Arnold expedition that went up there in the Revolutionary War to fight the Quebec, and they got beat really bad, but they went up the Kennebec River, and several of them kept their journals, and when they were 50 miles upstream, they were catching cod to eat, which would surprise me, because the cod would swim upstream like that, but it's a really large cod. So quite a few miles upstream.
Like to Augusta, or?
Yeah, maybe Augusta. So maybe it
Augusta,
wasn't 50 miles, but it was.
Oh, wow.
It was a few days into their
So cod and other ground fish, right? Like what are the hake and who's better fishing? Pollock. Their other ground fish.
Yeah.
Would come up to the tidal zone, first rapids then, probably.
Yeah, I should go further, I guess. I'm not sure why, but that's what they were writing in their diaries, that they were actually surprised to see the size of this cod that were upstream.
Okay, and
So it makes
Smell
surprises.
too. There's evidence that the dam is covering pretty good smelt habitat.
any sturgeon that is that historically?
From what I've heard, yes, but I don't know a lot about sturgeon, but from what I've heard, that historically there probably would have been.
Yeah, it's the list that according to Compass Franklin Waters was herring, shad, salmon, alewife, smelt, eels, sea run trout, and sturgeon. That's what it was. I mean, this river was quite a fishery in those days. And of course now, the thing is, what we see, we can't. It's hard to imagine what it was like then. What we see basically is a stream of water going down and not with hardly any life in it, but it was teeming with fish at the time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting parts about being sort of like in the role I'm in, is that it's like to dare to have the imagination for it to go in a good direction, right? That fish can be restored, that like what can come with that? If we have more fish, what comes with that? What comes with the more biodiversity? I'm really excited about this becoming, one of the rarest habitats on the East Coast, right? Expanding the freshwater tidal habitat, which is very rare. To me, we have the opportunity to restore that in our lifetime.
In our own town.
In our own time, literally in our backyard, in our corner of the world, we have the opportunity to restore something that can be enjoyed for generations to come. But it takes a leap well, it takes a leap of imagination and faith, if you will. So, and that I think that's the hard part for people who are used to seeing it the way that it is, and that's what we're kind of inviting people to imagine, right?
So the salt water comes in and the fresh water goes out. How far up the river does the salt water continue?
Well,
Salt,
this,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, here it doesn't even go past, it doesn't even go all the way up to the dam, does it?
Yeah, some, depending on the tide it can, but it won't, yeah, it pretty much sits at the bottom because salt water is heavier. But even after the dam comes out, there'll be that wedge at the bottom, but it won't go too much further past where the dam site is.
Okay.
It'll just be the push and the pull of the fresh water, of the tide, changing the levels of the fresh water.
In your experience, what have you found in the construction of these dams when you remove them? Is there any minerals or heavy metals or anything that you find in those dams? And the second part of that question is, where does that dam material go?
Yep, great question. So that's a huge part of any dam removal project, is making sure you have a good handle on what's behind the dam, because things can accumulate over time. So what we do know is that even during just regular floods, the reservoir, the pond behind the dam is small enough that stuff gets churned up constantly. So over the past 100 or so years, things have always been flushing out of that system. But even so, part of this project is still to get an extremely tight handle on what's behind there. So the current plan is to get a bunch of sediment samples, so starting right behind the dam and going all the way up to essentially where you get out of the influence of the dam, so it's about a mile up. So taking sediment samples all the way up and testing for everything that the state requires as part of their the regulatory soils program. So it's like heavy metals, I mean, you name it, stuff that I can't pronounce on there, like pesticides, you have to test for everything. And then then you report that to the state. And so depending on what you find, then you manage the project going forward. So for example, that Bostic project that Gordon mentioned, we tested the sediments, and there was one spot where we found slightly elevated levels of lead. And so what we proposed was go in there with essentially it's like a vacuum pump. You suck that one spot where you found lead out, make sure it's dealt with, and you get rid of it at an area that's been approved of. And then you're allowed to remove the dam and allow the sediment to naturally go down, because the assumption is the rest of the sediment, you tested it and it came back clean. The preference is to let that clean sediment incorporate back into the system again, because it's a natural process of the river. And so we would do that exactly here. We would take samples all the way up. We would also take samples downstream just to see like where, because we know we have an idea of where the sediment's gonna accumulate downstream. So we might as well test those areas too, just to see what's in there. So if there's anything that has lingered on over the past 100 or 200 years, we would find it. And so then we would deal with it appropriately.
And then the material from the dam itself?
Like the concrete, yeah, and so that would all be disposed of. And well, I shouldn't say disposed of, it's kind of up to the town if they want to keep it for any memorialization purposes. That's something that the town is going to be working on, and so if they want to keep blocks and like build a bench or do something like that, that's totally up to them. So, but nothing would end up back in the river essentially.
What about, you talk about the fish going up, what if the dam is taken out, the fish will swim upstream, they're gonna hit another roadblock when they get to Foots. Foots, is that a privately owned dam?
Yep. So Gordon mentioned it, it's a privately owned dam, but we're in the works with them, we're working with them to build what's called a nature-like fishway. So on the side where there's currently an old stone fishway, that fishway is very old and essentially doesn't work at all. And so what the current plan is to build a nature-like fishway, something that is essentially like a bypass channel on, if you're looking upriver on the left-hand side of the dam, that's property is owned by Greenbow. And so essentially we would build a river channel on that side of the dam that during the time of the year when fish want to be going up, that river channel would be flowing just like the river. The dam would be kind of stopped up a little bit and fish would go up around that way. And so it provides this kind of super accessible passageway that they don't really have right now. And so that's in the works. We're currently working on designing that project. And so it'll be a little bit before it's implemented, but these things all kind of go in fits and spurts. So that's kind of that's the current plan, is to make sure that every dam on the main stem of the Ipswich is addressed in some way.
And that's what's so interesting, I think, too, is that it's like a giant puzzle, right? Trying to, whether it's like you're looking at it like we're trying to restore a fishery, or, you know, or just connectivity on the river, however you want to frame like the question, but it's this puzzle, it's a puzzle. And so what's really exciting about right now is that there are so many puzzle pieces being, you know, parts of the puzzle being worked on. And there's been work done before us, and there's work to be done after, you know, like down the line too. But I think, you know, we, you know, there's a comprehensive plan, you know, on how we can sort of help restore this. If we're just talking fisheries, just help restore the fisheries. I mean, you'll said it in the film, the habitats exist above the dam. It's just, how can we give them access? And it's different with each dam, right? That's what I've learned. It's like, there's no easy answer. It's a you know, everything, you know, there's different conditions at each, you know, whether it's a dam or whatever, there's so many different factors to consider and perspectives too.
So building something like a nature like Fishway at Ipswich Mills would be extremely cost prohibitive because you don't really have that area to build it in like you do at Willowdale. There's plenty of open space there that is, you know, that's part of the floodplain that's not built up like it is in Ipswich. And to design, scope, plan, permit a nature like Fishway at the location of Ipswich Mills Dam would be probably on the order of $10 million. It would be extremely expensive, cost prohibitive, and we've said before, like Fishways still aren't, you know, they're never going to be 100% as efficient as dam removal. So dam removal is always the most preferred option, and then in situations where you can't, like at Foot Brothers, then you can kind of go down the list. What's the next best option? Nature like Fishway is kind of the next best option.
So are they really wide? Because I've seen that fish ladder up at Foots, it's tiny.
It's tiny, yeah. So it would be pretty wide. It would be, I think the current plan is to make it would be about half the size of the full width of the Ipswich River, and so it'd be pretty big. And the idea is to allow it to take most of the flow of the Ipswich River, and then, you know, just really make it attractive for fish
But
to
it
come
would
up.
be man-controlled?
They're probably, we're still working out those details because obviously the most important thing to Foot Brothers is to make sure they can control their water level for their canoe business. And so there might be like a gate at the top where during certain times of the year, they can make sure, like if the fish aren't running during the dead of the summer, they want to make sure that their, you know, their access to their kayak launch is still there. So it could be a case where it's managed like that. So, but yeah, there would be, that kind of stuff is managed by the state Division of Marine Fisheries. They work with the landowner to make sure it's called like an operations and management plan, that all that stuff is like, you do X at this time of the year, you do Y at this time of the year. So it's pretty like tightly regulated that that lives on in perpetuity.
The Bostic Dam has been held up, to my understanding, largely because of Lynn and their pumping station. Are there potentially any other water districts that would object to removing this dam?
None around Ipswich Mills. That shouldn't be, at least. So there's no surface water intakes like Lynn is upstream of Bostic. So there shouldn't be any concerns from that front.
Is the Lynn situation all taken care of now?
It is actually, yep. The Bostic has signed an agreement with this, it's kind of like a triangle agreement between the state, Bostic, and Lynn, that the state is going to help pay for a new pump station. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know how much I should say about it, but it was kind of a weird situation where everyone agreed to scratch each other's backs, and I think it all ended up working out. So
The new pump station would be in exactly the same place?
that's my understanding. I think it would, yeah. So it would just be, because the current pump station my understanding is that like it barely works, and so they're gonna kind of just reinstall it. So, yeah.
Neil, are some of the towns, states helping some of the towns go off the Ipswich River, like Wilmington didn't just get a grant
Yeah, so there's a whole nother, my colleague Erin, who's the resiliency director at Ipswich River, is on the Ipswich River Resiliency Task Force that's looking at trying to get, this water withdrawal issue solved, where the Ipswich River has so much water that's being withdrawn during the summertime and all times of the year, working with towns to find the right solution to get off of Ipswich River water. And so, I think I know Hamilton got a grant
It
that
was
they're working with.
The $2.3 million was just announced, I think, about 2 weeks ago, and it was Hamilton, the Hamilton Wenham Supplies, Linfield, Wilmington, and even Ipswich was awarded money. I mean, it was a mix of money for PFAS treatment and also for different stages of exploring getting some of these communities off of, getting them less dependent on Ipswich River water and exploring alternate water supply sources. So that's like great news for our river, and it's great work that they've been doing on the task force, which is, our legislators, our municipal partners, and nonprofits like us who care about water. So it's like moving, and it's another one of those puzzle pieces. Right? It's like it's like nature. It's complicated.
How much PFAS is in the Ipswich?
What's that?
How bad is the PFAS?
In the Ipswich River, so we took some samples for the Bostic Dam, but those were sediment samples. In the sediment, there was pretty much nothing, which is surprising. Surprisingly good. But for the water, I'm not sure if it's been tested. It's probably been tested, but that's not something that we do a whole lot of.
I'd like to say PFAS are a developing concern in the water world.
Yeah.
And it's just so new, and that's why these treatment plants are. That's why these towns are getting money. I mean, Ipswich, I think, got almost $500,000 for treatment, for PFAS treatment. And as well as a number of other communities like Linfield, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. But
I'm sure there's some in there, and it's just like, I know I live in Topsfield, and Topsfield's definitely dealing with a little bit of it too. So I know they're required to test for it, and they're really drilling down on it at a federal level too.
So the Merrimack has a lot of it.
Probably.
they have other problems too. I will say though, but like speaking of the Merrimack, like the sewage overflow, like that's one of the great things about the Ipswich rivers. We don't have those issues. I mean, at least now, But like we do. We're so fortunate to have, such a clean river in a sense.
Last week, New Jersey and New York had this Black Swan event, an earthquake. And it's never going to happen here, of course. But when we do these tests, there's this, I understand the town spends $50,000 a year inspecting the dam while it's there. And that's cost, taxpayer cost for Ipswich, right?
Yeah, there's costs associated with the dam. Like, so as a dam owner, you're required to maintain it and keep it up to a certain standard, and so you're required to inspect it regularly and make sure it's maintained. So there's a whole list of things during the last inspection that were identified that the town is currently negligent on. So there's some small cracks in the dam, there's vegetation growing on the dam when it's actually, you're not supposed to have any of that. It's supposed to be very well kept, and so these are resources that the town is, legally obligated to hold up, and those commitments will get more as the dam continues to age too. So I think it's that those costs seem relatively low. I think it's like an average of $10,000 per year, but assuming all the potential work they would have to do, it's more like $50,000 over the next 3 to 5 years or so, with the potential of it being more, especially there's things happen that, out in Western Mass this past summer, these freak rainstorm events that dumped 10 plus inches, they had to get evacuated because of some potential dam breaks. And so I'm not saying that would happen tomorrow for the Ipswich Mills Dam, but it's things that you just can't plan for too. So.
Well, what about a 4.8?
An earthquake?
Well, nobody in New Jersey expected it either.
Right?
We've had bigger earthquakes here. The Cape Ann earthquake, I forget what it was on the scale, but it was the biggest earthquake. It was centered off of Cape Ann.
Was it when the dam existed?
No, it was 1750, but it was the largest earthquake in the United States, I think, till the New Madrid.
Or would this withstand it?
Oh, man, I don't know if I can answer that, but that would be,
Yeah.
I guess I
there's-
would be surprised.
There is an interesting thing to think about there is that I know that when you get, after the Ipswich River flows from the dam and at least from basically where County Street Bridge is all the way down to the wharf, the river follows a fault line. And that's one of the reasons why the sides of the river are different elevations from Turkey Shore. You're way up here, but if you're across the river behind Town Hall, you're over here because there is a minor fault line. And I don't know how far that fault line goes up, but if we had a Cape Ann earthquake and it involved that fault line, I could see it moving those damn rocks around. Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
I learned something new every time.
It's just speculation, but the fault line does exist.
The fault, yeah, I didn't know
Yeah.
about the fault.
And I mean, that's why I call it a black swan event, because it's so rare, but it's so catastrophic.
Yep, earthquakes,
Yeah.
yeah, earthquakes
It has to
can be
be
hugely
considered.
damaging.
I gotta go back to the fish. You mentioned eels coming up there.
Yeah.
Are there's certain times of the year that the elvers come up and they'll slide up and around the dam. Does that happen here at this dam? That people can go out and document how many elvers there are?
I don't know.
It does, and so it's not, there's some places that we know of that have like actual like eel traps where they can document it. We've actually asked for them to try that here, just so we can know, but we do know, like, we work a lot with the person that lives right next to the dam there. She's a volunteer and she's always kind of like out and looking out there, and she said she saw eels coming up like through the fish slider. I think that was last year.
There was this
so.
swimming, I'm talking about the elvers, kind of.
Oh, the elvers. I'm not sure what she saw. I forget. I don't know if it
Yeah.
was a little
They're
one.
so
yeah.
tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would,
It
yeah.
might not have been a little one,
Yeah.
but
$2,000 a pound.
Yeah.
I do know
saw
that
that article.
somebody got busted one time doing harvesting glass eels. They had, somebody found the equipment around the dam. Our coworker told this story because I think it happened.
Yeah, it was in the
years
Ipswich
ago.
Chronicles, 2013, and actually, one of our fish counters is Katie. Katie was counting fish, and she noticed something in the water, and it ended up being these traps to catch eels, but really what it was there was a bunch of turtles in there that got trapped and didn't make it. So it's quite a gruesome scene but yeah, I mean the eels, if you have not seen the PBS documentary on eels, I highly recommend it. It was on Amazon Prime for free for a while. So fascinating. And that's what's exciting too, you know, like talking about biodiversity. And I've had people, the person who used to run the newspaper store downtown or own the newspaper store downtown, he told me he used to take his girls out there at low tide and like get shovels, and one time he said there was a bucket and he lifted up the bucket and this huge eel was underneath it. And I mean, just how excited, you know, it's just an exciting time to be able to allow more of that. I think that's our opportunity, is like, what can we allow if we kind of remove the touch of man, you know?
I'm from North Andover, and I've looked back in the town meeting records, and from the very start, for maybe about 100 years, there were people chosen at town meeting to take care of the streams for the next year. So they would clean up the edges of the streams. I'm not sure exactly what they would do, because it didn't explain it. But for every year, they would be cleaning up the streams. That would be the Cochiquic Brook, Boston Brook, Mosquito Brook, Fish Brook, and it would be to allow the alewives to come up either from the Merrimack or from the Ipswich. And that was their job.
Herring
Right,
wardens,
yeah.
yep. They used to be designated herring wardens at each kind of tributary and river. And they persisted like until relatively recently. There used to be some, but it's something that's kind of died off now that the state kind of manages everything. But part of me kind of wishes they still had that, where you had kind of like groups of people who that was their stretch of the river to take care of and make sure like, if there was a fishway, that it was maintained. And so, yeah, it's definitely a cool thing, cool bit of history.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. Thank you, Gordon Harris, for bringing your incredible knowledge of the history of this town and this river to us today. At Ipswich River Watershed Association, we are here to answer questions, to help people go through the over, 10 to 15 years of research that's been done on this project, on just the idea of like, should we remove this dam? They've been thinking about it for a long time. So if you have any questions, if your neighbors, if your family, if your friends have any questions, please send them our way. We're happy to answer any questions. We have a number of other events coming up. You can always check our website. But Tuesday, we'll be showing the film again, but at True North from 1 to 3. But we will have the Turtle Rescue League and the Blandings Turtle Project there with baby turtle hatchlings. Division of Marine Fisheries, they're out with nets in the river right now trying to catch us some river fish to see. We have a local clammer who's trying to get us some clams and oysters. He's like, what about green crabs? You want to see some green crabs? So we'll have all sorts of river critters and river critter wranglers. That's at True North, Sunday from 1 to 3. And we just know that this is our role in this project. We are advocates. We are advocating for dam removal, but we are here to answer the community's questions and to provide space to have conversations. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.